My name's Mike, and welcome to Billiard Breakdown. Today we have a special subscriber request from Edward Wallace, 1633. Edward would like to know how I play safeties. So here are 10 safeties that I most commonly play. The first safety I'd like to demonstrate is shooting a stop shot and leaving the cue ball behind one of your object balls. Let's say your opponent's on the 8. You are left with something like this. This is a very difficult shot for your opponent to hit. Safety number 2 is more applicable for a 9-ball pool, or if you're both on the 8, an 8-ball pool. My goal here is to hit the 8 at roughly a 45-degree angle in order to leave the 8 somewhere over here, preferably close to the rail, and leaving the cue ball somewhere over here, leaving your opponent with a difficult bank. And in this scenario, if your opponent misses the bank, you're likely to be left with a shot on the 8. The third safety I commonly use is when I have a difficult shot on the object ball. I have the 14 over here. It's not clear for the corner because of the 8, and it's a little too sharp of an angle for me to confidently cut into the side. So what I want to do here is I want to tie up the 14 with the 8. Instead of shooting the 14 directly into the 8, it's better to shoot the 14 into the rail and have it roll into the 8. It gives you a little more margin for error with speed control. And just like that, my opponent has an extremely difficult shot, and I'm likely to get back on the table with a shot on the 14. Safety number 4 is also good for 9-ball, or if you and your opponent are both on the 8. Let's say we have the 8 near the rail over here, and I don't have a high percentage shot to pocket the 8. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the 8 very thinly and attempt to leave the cue ball somewhere on this end of the table. So for this shot, I used a little bit of top left spin, but as you can see, the cue ball is on the opposite end of the 8 ball, and my opponent has no easy shot. Safety number 5 is pretty useful for a common scenario. Let's say your opponent is on the 8 ball, and you still have an object ball left on the table, and the cue ball is around this area. Instead of trying to pocket the 1 into the corner and most likely leaving your opponent with a shot on the 8, it's best to just gently roll the cue ball into the 1, forcing your opponent to shoot the bank. Now, if your opponent shoots the bank and misses, then you are able to shoot the 1 into the corner. For example, let's say you get ball in hand. You have a shot on the 1. Make the 1 and you have a shot on the 8. Safety number 6 is for when you have 2 difficult shots to choose from. It's always best to choose the shot that leaves your opponent in the most difficult position. So let's say you have 2 object balls left and your opponent is on the 8. Put the 8 over here, put a stripe down here, and a stripe over here. So let's say you only have the 9 and the 13 left. Your opponent is on the 8 ball. In this scenario, both the 13 and the 9 are difficult shots to make, but it is best to shoot the 13 somewhere over there while leaving the cue ball on this end of the table, so your opponent is left with a bank shot on the 8 rather than a straight-on shot if you were to shoot the 9 and miss. So for example, this leaves a difficult shot for your opponent, and you're likely to get back on the table with a shot at the 13. Safety number 7 is pocketing your object ball while leaving your opponent tough. Your opponent's on the 8 ball, and you have your object ball on the other end of the table. Now this is incredibly difficult to make position for. So instead, what you can do is call a safety, shoot your 13 into the corner, and let your opponent shoot the 8. Now if your opponent shoots the 8 and misses, you may be left with an easy shot on the 8. Safety number 8 is useful when your opponent is on the 8 ball. Let's say somewhere over here. It's a relatively easy shot if your opponent is clear for it. You have a cluster of balls on this side of the table. And let's say you have one more object ball over here. You don't want to shoot the 14 or the 12 into the corner, because if you miss, it's going to leave an easy shot for your opponent on the 8. What you can do instead is shoot the cue ball with light top right spin and attempt to leave the cue ball behind the cluster of balls. This way your opponent has to kick or bank at the 8, and if they miss, you get ball in hand for an easy run out. Safety number 9 is useful when you and your opponent are on the same ball. Let's say you have a thin cut on the 9. If you were to hit the 9 too thick, the object ball would land somewhere in this general area, leaving your opponent with a pretty easy shot. If you were to hit the 9 too thin, the 9 would land somewhere in this general area, and the cue ball would land on the opposite end. I hit the 9 too thin, but at least the cue ball came all the way back to this end of the table, leaving the 9 somewhat on the rail. It's likely your opponent will miss the shot and you will get another chance at the 9. Safety number 10, which is one of my most commonly used safeties, is to simply just leave my opponent on the rail. Let's say if I'm in this position, I have no obvious shot on the 8, and I have no obvious safety as well. All I'm going to try to do is leave the cue ball on the rail. Now once the cue ball is on the rail, it leaves your opponent with much less surface area to shoot on the cue ball. Even though the 8 may be clear for the side or the corner, it's an extremely low percentage shot for your opponent, and you're likely to get another shot on the 8. Another example of playing safe on the rail is if your opponent's on the 8 ball and you still have the 14 to shoot at, but there's no obvious pocket for you to shoot the 14 into, and there's no obvious safety for you to play either. When in doubt, leave it on the rail. The cue ball is on the rail and the 14 is partially blocking the 8. Just don't do it against me. Like and subscribe if you found this helpful.